Most people who want to come into advertising are like, I want to make the next Cadbury's Gorilla ad. I want to make the next Super Bowl ad. I just want to do TV. No one knows outside of, these agencies that Land Rover's entire online experience is being run off of Google Sheets in the back end right now. If you lose a big client, you're going to lose your job. We actually gave ourselves kind of like joke titles at first. Head of making it up, head of making it happen, and head of making it work. Oh, great. That's some big, sexy company names on the CV.
Yep.
How do you be very deliberate when you're off, be fully off. When you're on, be fully on and focused. Don't kind of do this half-half.
Yeah. So here we are, season 2 of Nevermind the Job Spec, the podcast. I'm joined by Nick Brackenbury. Nick, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me here. I'm excited.
Oh, pleasure, man. Seriously, I mean, we were chatting pre the recording, and I think had we started about 15, 20 minutes ago, we would have a lot of content to kind of share with everybody. But look, just for everybody, they'll see it on the social, but just for everybody's notice, you're founder and CEO of
a company called NearSt, retail tech startup.
And how big are you headcount wise? How large are you as a team?
We're about 20 people at the minute.
Cool.
Really awesome team.
Excellent. Well, listen, we'll come to the story of NearSt because that's actually really quite interesting about the light bulb moment. But what I want to do to kick the show off is take you back to 2010 when you'd just finished your degree in media practice and theory. And I'm always interested to understand what individuals are thinking at that point where they're just about to really start moving into a formalized career. What were your kind of ambitions and goals at that time? Take you back, best part of 13 years.
Yeah. Gosh, don't tell me. I took that degree because I really love making stuff. So, the clue's in the name, media practice and theory. It's not just a bunch of lectures and seminars. Half the degree was getting out into the real world and just making things, making films, doing documentaries, doing radio documentaries. Super fun. Right from like the first week of university, you're thrown out into the real world. So end of that, I was like, I want to be doing this. I want to be making stuff, but I didn't really want to be going down a route where I didn't have control of my own destiny as well. And film felt a little bit like luck-based. You have to be in the right place at the right time. So I was kind of looking like where's somewhere where I can be making stuff, can work with super interesting, smart people, but also it's very much like a meritocracy. If I work hard and I'm good at what I do, can I just progress quickly and do bigger, more interesting, cool stuff? Yeah. And that's kind of what I was thinking at the end of that. Like, where can I find that in the world?
Yeah. So interesting, then you did an internship.
Mm-hmm.
I think there was something between the end of the degree and the internship, if I remember correctly. Referring back to your LinkedIn profile, there was a little creative period.
Oh, I got I volunteered to produce the kind of end of year graduation video for the university and a couple other things because it's it's a bunch of students that know how to make films, so you get roped into making all sorts of stuff, which is actually great fun.
Yeah. Can we still find that online?
Somewhere.
Is there an old edit of that?
Yeah. Oh gosh.
YouTube.
There's a bunch of unlisted old. I probably made like 24 different random little films. They're all unlisted on YouTube probably for the better.
Oh mate, brilliant. But Oglivy, right?
Yeah.
I mean, major brand, right? Internship, and then off the back of the internship, you secured a full-time role. So how did that come about? I mean, how did you kind of get the internship in the first place?
So I think, as with many things in life, like I was lucky in terms of being at the right place at the right time with the right set of interests. So university, I was doing film production, but I loved tech. And this was the early days of like Twitter being a major focus. All sorts of different blogs were starting to become really, really big. And I loved all this and I was really into it. And I also loved kind of video gaming. And so I built a lot of my own computers at that time just because it was cheaper than buying them. And so at Oglivy, I kind of turned up for the interview, and most people who want to come into advertising are like, I want to make the next Cadbury's Gorilla ad. I want to make the next Super Bowl ad. I just want to do TV. And I was there as this sort of like geeky, techie person that wanted to just look at all this social media stuff and could also make things, which was, the creator economy was just getting started then. And so they said, well, we've got this new part of the agency that's in the PR team called the 360 Digital Influence team. And that's where we're trying to build out this practice to do blog influencer analysis. They weren't called influencers back then, but it was like, how do we assess the influence of blogs? How do we track and monitor conversation in real time online? I was like, that's super cool.
Yeah, that sounds very cool indeed. And I think, so thinking about that timeline, would it be fair to say that that was about the time when digital transformation became a real thing, right? It became like, because I remember, I think it was like PwC started with this whole bunch of kind of like videos around digital transformation is the future, businesses will need to evolve, et cetera, et cetera. So perhaps Oglivy were in the same sort of thinking at that time. But as you said, it's kind of, it was almost like maybe a startup within an established business. Is that possibly what
for sure
to you about it?
Absolutely. It was, I was team member number 3 in the UK office. There was a bit of a team over in DC. Max, my co-founder, was team member number 4. Okay. And that's where I met him.
That makes sense, right? Okay.
And yeah, it was, but it's kind of it wasn't kind of the popular thing to do going into advertising and wanting to do this kind of social media thing, but it was something that was like super fascinating to me. And it was like, that's just what I pitched myself on in the interview process, not really knowing where it would go.
Wicked. And I think perhaps part of the appeal for that is, I would imagine, is you get to do a load of stuff, because obviously there's not like, being number 3, there's not a lot of formalized hierarchy. There's not a lot of formalized solutions. So it's kind of like, okay, cool. We've got an idea that this could work, and we need some really resilient and kind of individuals that are quite happy to go on a path where there is a bit of ambiguity, and you need to be curious and you need to explore, because we're not really able to give you anything from the off other than our brand, which will open doors, right?
Yeah.
So what were your kind of takeaways from that? Because I mean, obviously you progressed from the internship into Oglivy proper full time. You were there for the best part of 4 years. Reflecting back on that time now, what were the 1, 2, 3 real takeaways from that period in your career?
So I think I had a few different people there who really just trusted me and let me get on with things, but also really challenged me to say, go off, have a go at this, but also if it wasn't good enough, would tell me. And that's really shaped a lot of how I think about how you work with people. And it was just, here's a cool idea, or if you have a cool idea, like cool if it fits in the strategy, go and try and create it and see what you come back with. And I definitely was able to, we got to build and work on some super cool stuff.
Yeah.
We got to do some stuff that behind the scenes was actually pretty wild and shaky, but it looked all right on the front.
Yeah.
And did some stuff that really failed as well. And kind of learned the hard way. It's like, okay, wow. I'm like, I'm definitely also not up to that, but I was very lucky and very privileged to have people that were willing to kind of take that bet and be like, yeah, okay, you're like 22 years old. You think you know it all, but you definitely don't, but you definitely are hungry. Like, go off and do it. And that's how I try and run as much as possible NearSt at the minute as well. Yeah.
I think there's some interesting takeaways from that kind of Oglivy period, in so much as, and we're talking about, kind of MVPs there, like minimal viable product, right? You're looking at building something on the front end that you can test with a customer or potential client. The back end is manual. It's probably not completely kind of automated and the technology that's promised at the front end, but actually what you're looking to try and understand is what is going to engage future customers, what is of interest, what's useful. So there's that one piece which I think plays really well into the startup space. Secondly, it's kind of like you get to take your ideas forward. They're not kind of batted down straight away, but like, yeah, that's a really great idea, Nick, but this is what we do. It's kind of like, okay, cool. You've got a hypothesis, try and build it. Yeah. Show us something. Show us, something more than just your idea. And then in the third place, it's like that empowerment and trust. If we talk about age, early 20s and stuff like that, and if you think about a brand like Oglivy, even though you're a startup in an established business, there could be the temptation for people to be like, look, we're happy for you to take risk, but remember, you're under the umbrella of this massive brand. Whereas in actual fact, it sounds like you were fully empowered to kind of go, you know what, run with this, because we're happy to take risks because we feel like the payoff will be greater than actually being overly risk averse. And correct me if I'm wrong on this, those sort of 3 things play really well into the startup space, right?
Yeah, completely. We're just very lucky to be in spaces with that was trying to do something quite new, but also people that were just willing to try things.
Yeah.
And it kind of it was a 3-year grad program, and I was on 3 different rotations. But every one of those teams that I was in, I was very lucky to work with people who were just like, yep, definitely, like, let's give it a go off, see what you can build, figure it out, and we'll see what comes back. And with clients as well that were up for that too, knowing it was quite a new area as opposed to like, this is the way it's done. This is the way how we make direct mail. This is how we make TV ads. This is how we make out of home ads. It was like, okay, we're trying to build a content library for, a massive global brand's sponsorship of the London 2012 Olympics. And this is when content was starting to be a thing in 2012. It's like, okay, how do we go off and capture a ton of content from all these different athletes we're sponsoring and, in multiple countries? How do we then use these and empower other teams to use them? It's like, cool, go off, find some companies that can help us store all this, figure out a system to distribute it, and then come out with a way to try and turn this into really great content we can use.
Is there a significant product service project from that time at Oglivy that you refer back to as perhaps a kind of key learning experience that maybe informed your thought process around NearSt? Or were there a particular individual or group of individuals that you kind of worked with that you felt your learning really accelerated under their guidance or collaborating with them?
I was really lucky to have on my 3 rotations, 3 really fantastic managers. Kind of Michael Dara, who was building this 360 digital influence team in PR. Ju Teo, who was kind of running the Olympics project that I was on in advertising, where we kind of were sponsoring, working with, a massive global brand to sponsor all these international athletes in like Angola, Azerbaijan, all these different countries around the world. And then in my 3rd one, where I was working with an amazing lady called Catherine Francis, who was kind of building out this new digital experience practice in the agency of like, how do we help global brands rebuild their websites? And they won the Land Rover global brief to kind of help Land Rover rebuild their entire online experience. And in doing that, while we were transitioning through, we kind of also had to launch the new Range Rover Sport. I think this was in 2013 or 14, I want to say. And the new website, redesigning and rebuilding their entire online experience was all these crazy talented people in Oglivy, but all these other companies that Land Rover had as well. I was, young and got exposure to all this, but I then got landed with the project of saying, look, while we're transitioning over to this new website, it's going to be like an 18-month project. They love this new microsite we built to launch the Range Rover Sport. Can we do these for all the other vehicles? Because it's much better than the old website we have right now. And this was a temporary microsite we'd built that we were running off a series of Google Sheets in the back end. And we eventually, I was kind of like, Nick, you run this and roll this out across 26 markets, but not just for the Range Rover Sport, but for the Range Rover and the Evoque and the Land Rover, the Discovery, and then the new Discovery Sport and the Defender. And it's like, can we do these for all these different sites? And what we ended up running is more or less Land Rover's entire global online experience across 26 markets off a series of spreadsheets in Google Sheets in the back end, with kind of a huge team of international content creators, translators, and all these things that are just running off of spreadsheets. And I was sort of running this program thinking like, no one knows outside of, these agencies that Land Rover's entire online experience is being run off of Google Sheets in the back end right now. And we basically built a CMS off a, content management system off of these kind of hundreds of thousands of cells in Google Sheets. And it worked. And I was there like, wow, it's not a long-term solution, but one of the world's biggest, most prestigious brands, we've been able to run off of this. Yeah. And it's like, you can actually just make anything if you're willing to cobble together a few different solutions. Yeah. And you get some smart people involved who are like, yeah, okay, we can do that.
Yeah. Well, if they didn't know, they know now.
It's not that way anymore. Just keen to stress.
Yeah. But what it does prove is that you can create things that, like you say, on the front end do, and I think the key thing there is the look, feel, and interactivity. Right, the back end, you build that, right? You can build that, you can change that, you can iterate on that. That's fine, but it's that front end experience, the piece that touches the client, whether it's B2B or B2C, which is the really rich piece that you're looking to try and gather data and insights from. That sounds like an amazing project. amazing project. And of the three people that you kind of name checked there as kind of leaders you worked under, is there any kind of piece of advice that they gave you that always kind of resonates now? Or is it with just the experience of working and collaborating and being led by them that just really sort of sits with you and sits in the memory?
I think it's more the actions that they took, which is just trust, challenge you, if something's not good enough to say, but also not like make that a reason not to continue trusting you to do things going forward.
Yeah.
And it's like, here's something, a big, hairy project.
Yep.
Have a go and off you go.
Wicked. No, it's really cool. That's really cool. So the story of NearSt, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, is that I think the idea, we'll come to the actual idea in a second. That's a great story in itself. But I want to precursor this next bit with a video I saw that you kind of recorded, I think, for Cord about 5-6 months ago. And you were talking about risk. And you were talking about risk within a kind of your career. And I wonder whether this is something you've reflected on now, or it's something you were aware of at that point where you were kind of still working for Oglivy and kind of trying to spin up NearSt. So, and I think the video kind of touches upon, and it emphasizes that, willingness to take a risk, step away from the traditional pathway and traditional career pathway, perhaps, kind of challenge yourself, and that actually there's not, intended failure and or a deficit at the end of taking risk. It can actually be super beneficial, and it's just taking a step beyond your perhaps preconceived ideas of what a career could look like. So a lot in that, but at the time of, kind of still being at Oglivy and starting the NearSt journey, was there a point where you were like, I'm going to take this risk, or was it a natural progression? It just seemed like the natural next step. I'm just trying to understand your mindset there. Was it like, I need to make this change, or actually this seems to be progressing naturally and I will just make this change?
There's a quote that I actually have no idea where it's from, but it's, I didn't know this at the time, but it kind of absolutely sums up my mindset then and still how it is now. And that's that the safe path probably isn't as safe as it seems, and the risky path probably isn't as risky as it seems.
Love that.
And when you're working in a massive agency, you think, I'm in a big safe job, but actually, if you lose a big client, you're going to lose your job. And this goes for anyone in any job, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And I also looked at my career progression. I was like, I could kind of see what the next 10 years looked like. And it was like, great, this fine, but it looked pretty predictable. And it was like, I might get to work on some super cool campaigns and some super cool projects. But it's, I'm not really in control of it beyond just how fast I can go up that ladder.
Yeah.
And I just thought, okay, that's cool, but I kind of see where that goes. And it's a very, you get to work on lots of great global brands and work with amazing people. But I was like, I kind of want to go out and actually make something myself and get exposure to all the different skill sets that can come along with it. And so I sort of had that mindset of like, I actually want to try and build something as opposed to creating something for someone else. Like I want to do something that can actually make an impact on the world.
Yeah.
And really have some sort of lasting impact is the best way to describe it. And that's when my now co-founder kind of pitched me the idea for NearSt. It was right. I've been in that headspace for probably about 6 months, and he kind of pitched me this idea, and it was just the right time.
Yeah. That's cool. And it brings us, like I say, nicely up to NearSt. And listening back to some of the content you recorded 4 or 5 years ago, the story of NearSt just sounds like super cool in terms of how it kind of came around as an idea. Just kind of give the listeners a little bit of a taster of that. How did NearSt come into being as an idea?
So Max and I, we'd been working together since early 2011, and he'd gone off and built his own consultancy business, and I'd helped him with some of the kind of content creation for that, proofreading things that he was doing and just giving him some feedback on it, and just another set of eyes. And he'd taken me out to a gig to say thank you for some of the work I'd been doing on it. And at this gig, he pitched me this problem he had where he's, a few weeks prior, he'd had some friends coming over for dinner, and the light bulb in his dining room had gone. And so, he did what most of us would do. He pulled out his phone and he just searched for whatever it says on the side of the light bulb, like a 15-watt Philips LED bulb near me. And Google just gave them a ton of shopping results. It's just like, here's a bunch of places you can order it online. It'll be at your door in a day or two, which is awesome. That logistics network exists. Because an Angel, like Angel in London, is not short of shops. And so he just wanders around the neighborhood for like half an hour, 45 minutes, in and out of different stores, trying to find this, this fitting for this light bulb. And he ends up finding it in this little convenience store at the end of his road after 45 minutes. And he's like, how is it so much easier to get this thing shipped from some warehouse that's like 200 kilometers away from my house than figure out it's in this store that's like 100 meters from my front door? And it just seemed absolutely mad to him. My initial reaction was like, there's probably an app for that.
Yeah.
Like, you've just not found it, Max. And then it just stuck with me for several days. I was like, why? Like, I had no idea why it didn't exist, but I was like, surely this is kind of obvious that this should exist. And why doesn't it? And just the more I dug into it, and the more I looked at like companies that had tried to do it and failed, it just seemed really strange that like this surely will have a massive impact on the way we engage with shops and high streets, and it just doesn't exist. And luckily, that naivety was naivety, because I think if we'd known, it's one of these things you probably wouldn't have started if you knew like, oh, okay, that's why it doesn't exist. It's a really hard problem to solve. But at the time, that naivety and that kind of youthful, like, yeah, okay, we'll do this, was enough.
But knowing you as I do, and just listening to your story so far, you like to find solutions to the tough questions, right? That can we do this? Kind of, is this possible? And your mindset's kind of wired to that. It's like, okay, cool. You call it naivety, but at the same token, it's kind of like, well, yeah, I understand what the traditional thinking says about this particular proposition. However, and that brings us into actually, just to give the listeners a bit of an overview, what is NearSt as a proposition? What is it?
As we get online shoppers into physical stores, and although we started life as an app, today we are a B2B company. So we're kind of the plumbing behind the scenes that enables retailers to get the inventory information, the products that are actually on their shelves, and get them displayed in places like Google and Facebook. So if you or I are searching for that light bulb, you don't just see a bunch of shopping results. You see Google telling you, oh, it's also in this store, 100 meters away at the end of your road. And we're kind of like the plumbing behind the scenes that is helping the retailer get that data out of their store to people like Google or Facebook. Or our vision is to get it anywhere: Apple Maps, TikTok, anywhere that a product could exist or a store could exist. How do we help that platform know what's actually on the shelves of that store?
A super powerful proposition. And I just want you to kind of share the, I guess, the initial user research that yourself and Max did. A Boris bike and about 150 retailers, I think it was, or something like that.
Yeah, well, we spent about 6 weeks on Boris bikes, just going around London with like this demo version of this mocked up iPad app that we pretended existed, but it didn't yet. That was like, hey, if we get your store onto this app where customers, we started the company as an app, a consumer facing proposition. Yeah. We just cycled around London for about 6 weeks, just going in and out of stores, which was insanely valuable. Like, we got a hell of a lot of rejection, but it's also probably one of the steepest parts of the learning curve, because we were just getting so many firsthand accounts and rejections from stores generally. And I think we must have set some sort of record for most miles covered by Boris bike in a month during that time. But it was insanely valuable just having that firsthand repeated rejection and validation.
Yeah. And I think it kind of plays into that mindset piece again around getting out there and trying to understand the scope of the challenge, the kind of mindsets and thinking around. So both sides, this is a solution, but equally, what's the customer, the target client thinking? What kind of challenges do they perceive that they're having? Do they see value in this particular solution and this proposition? And if they do, where is it? Is our thinking aligned? We think that this could work really well for them, but actually, is that something that they feel could be valuable for them? So I think that, and it comes, I think that links into the sort of time at Oglivy, right? Where it's like, okay, cool, you've got an idea. You've got an idea and or a concept. Try and validate that and try and build it. And to your point around the kind of iPad, I think in the story that you tell, you're trying to give these iPads away. It's just kind of almost like, take them, use them. It's there. It's ready to rock and roll. And people are like, what? You're giving me free tech and a solution. What's the catch?
Yeah. It's funny in hindsight, like we couldn't give away iPads.
Yeah. It's kind of like,
but it led us to this really important insight that it's like, okay, we're giving them a £500 device and they don't want it. So they must be pretty wedded to the stock keeping system they've already got.
exactly.
But I think the other part there, we were very lucky to very early on find a fantastic third technical co-founder in Thomas, who could pretty much make anything overnight. But even then, there's a lot of different pieces to this to actually make it work. But what he was also amazing at, and Max is really good at this too, is mocking stuff up. So it doesn't need to work. It can just look like it works. And I think today there's so many places that will sell you kind of like development outsourcing and all these things. And, you got to go and build it first. It's like, no, you can just, so much of it you can mock up or just automate with, tools like Zapier, tools like Google Sheets. There's so much you can make work without actually needing to build anything or really write any meaningful code, that you can validate a huge part of what you're doing without really having to spend very much money. And that's super cool about the era we live in now.
Yeah.
Like, 15 years ago when I was at kind of finishing uni and starting at Oglivy, that was starting to come into practice. And now it's even more so. It's like you can make so much with so little so quickly that you can like go out, find out if the idea works. Like don't let anything hold you back. Just go out and give it a go.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, we were chatting, like I said before the podcast, NearSt as a proposition, it's proved the concept. It's something that, got a portfolio of very happy customers that are, kind of lots of endorsements on your website around how it works. It's really worked for them. But I'm interested to understand what are the big questions you're trying to answer as a team at the moment. Because I appreciate this is, it's a process, right? What you've done, you've proved that this particular proposition works, it has value. But equally, you're in a unique position where you're at the forefront of trying to change an industry that is very traditionally, and to your point, wedded to a certain way of working. Now, through what you've done and the sort of developments around, the proposition, the insights you've gained from your customers and them utilizing NearSt, that you're tracking in the right direction. That you're moving the industry in a direction that is healthy and inevitable. But, introducing a product and proposition is one thing, and people adopting it is one thing. Making meaningful change, that's a bigger, hairier kind of question and challenge. So what are the kind of big questions you're thinking about at the moment as a group?
It's interesting you say the inevitable piece, because a huge part of everything we do believes that what we're doing is inevitable. Like at some point we will connect every product in every shop on every high street to the web. And it will just be as normal as finding opening hours in Google. Like that wasn't normal 10 years ago. That didn't exist. Now it's just like, yeah, of course. I have my business information in Google Maps. And that's the exciting and the frustrating and challenging bit in equal measure. It's like, okay, we're all going to get there, but we're all going to get there at slightly different speeds. So one of the biggest things that we've spoken about a little bit before is, how do you help an industry that's used to thinking about kind of like online attribution and offline attribution? So how you can work out if the stuff you're doing online is selling stuff and how the stuff you're doing offline is selling stuff. How do you bridge those two worlds? It's sort of like taking two totally different ways of thinking and trying to smash them into each other, which is like, okay, people are going to see stuff online with these fancy digital tools that you're used to using. And then they're going to go into your store offline and buy some stuff. And we can't link these two worlds together, but we all know and agree it's definitely going to be driving sales. We just don't know exactly how many. But we have ways of thinking about this, but it kind of short circuits a lot of thinking because it's new and it's a different way of thinking about it. And it's one of the most frustrating, but also engaging problems to work on, because it's like, there's a solution to this. There is a solution to helping people grasp this. And some of it's time and familiarity and just enough people grasping it, enough other people saying it works. But problems like that are really motivating and interesting and frustrating in equal measure.
And they have to be, right? Because ultimately any meaningful change is not going to be easy. And certainly in, like you say, a traditional industry sector that is changing and is developing. And to your point that you've illustrated, it has moved on the last 10 years, but sometimes the pace of that change feels slower than perhaps you would want it to be, given the opportunities you can see further on down the road. But yeah, that's super interesting. I'm going to change tack slightly now because you're a founder, co-founder.
Mm-hmm.
Leaving Oglivy for NearSt, was that even, were you even kind of conscious of, oh, okay, so I'm becoming a co-founder of a business? You know, what does that mean for me? Or was it just like, okay, it was more about the business that you were looking to establish, and that was kind of the title that you've assumed quite simply because you were one of the co-founders? What was your mindset then? Was there, I guess what I'm looking to understand is, was there a certain amount of prestige with being a co-founder? You're like, okay, cool, I'm going to be a co-founder of a business now. Or was it like, well, NearSt is the problem I want to answer, and this is the job title or label that I will assume to be able to do that?
It's funny. I don't think we really thought about it. We actually gave ourselves kind of like joke titles at first.
And this is the thing. Most people don't. You don't think of it in that sort of, I always say, you kind of, the job title that you have on your kind of LinkedIn profile is not necessarily the one that you feel like inherently.
We had head of making it up, head of making it happen, and head of making it work. So I was head of making it happen, Max was making it up, and Thomas was making it work. But after we were starting to pitch investors, they were like, okay, what do you actually do? And they're like, so you're the CEO, you're kind of like the CSO, CPO, and you're the CTO, looking at the three of us. And like, yeah, but chief executive officer of a 3-person team is kind of a dumb title. And they're like, yeah, but like, that's what you are.
Yeah.
And so then at some point when you've had that conversation 10 times, you're like, okay, change it to co-founder and CEO, and we'll get rid of the head of making it up. But we're always a bit sad to see those go. But it's also like, if you're fighting upstream, it's just a distraction.
Exactly that. And I think to your point, when you kind of touch the world, as it were, in terms of investors, they want to see those very clear delineations in terms of the founding team, right? So then you have to really be thinking about how you communicate as a CEO and communicate as a COO and a kind of CTO. I remember one time I went into a new business that we were partnering with, completely off the cuff, like a large proportion of the team were in there, and they were like, oh, so introduce yourself. And at the time, kind of never mind, job spec was probably about 2 or 3 months old, if that. It was quite literally the worst introduction you could ever give. I mean, I'm not being funny, there were people sitting in that room that actually probably felt sorry and slightly awkward for me because I pitched it in a way I was just like, I tried to be all kind of off the cuff about it. Oh, I do a bit of this, a bit of that. Blah. And then I saw that they were like, no, actually, we really want to know what you do. And I was just like, I hadn't really given any thought to the fact that I was a founder, CEO, if you will. I was just like the guy that led, never mind the job spec, and we're here to deliver talent acquisition recruitment solutions. So it's interesting that kind of almost touching that more formalized, where people have an expectation and you're not even in that mindset, right? You're just kind of like, well, chief of kind of making things, and in some cases breaking things to make things. So as a founder now, 1, 2, 3 pieces of advice for other founders, and one learning that was probably the toughest learning, but the most valuable.
The 3 pieces of advice. The first one, which always sticks out to me, is just backing yourself. And this is more just a life kind of, I guess, mantra for myself, or something I follow, because there's so much doubt in, your startup. You're by default dead. You're by default going to fail. And you're by default doing things that are like, probably haven't been done, or they have been done, but other people have failed at them. And so it's like, well, it's just a lot of kind of dead bodies around in this space, or there's no one here.
Yeah.
And so there's no kind of blueprint. So you're going down one of those 2 paths for sure. And so you just have to have a lot of like, there's going to be a huge amount of doubt, a lot of rejection. It's like, no, you have to really just back yourself and be like, no, we're going for this. And that's not to say don't take advice. There's so many smart people out there, but it's also like, just have conviction and just back yourself that, like, why not you? And then the second one, which kind of more goes into our culture, is like, a company is, at the end of the day, people and some legal documents that occasionally you have to check. And that's it. There's nothing else. There's the brand is a really important part of it, but that kind of comes from the people and everything we decide to do. Yeah. And so if you don't kind of put the people at the heart of it and think about, how do you find great people, and then how do you help them do their best work? Then ultimately you don't really have anything at all. So, and that's something there's only so much you can try and like, I don't know, a superhero yourself. Like if I just work harder, I can get it done. No, you need to find great people and then set up a great environment for them, for them to do really amazing work. And to be honest, I'd keep it to those two things. Like it's just back yourself and then go and find great people and try and set them up to get on with the work and value them in the best way possible, and kind of a great product. And I forget who said it, but like people, product, profits in that order is really, really important.
Love that, man. Love that. And then the most valuable, but I mean, it could be a really pleasant thing, but invariably in a startup, the most valuable lesson is probably one of the biggest challenges you've kind of had to overcome, right? And is there anything that immediately pops in your head, or when you think of that?
Yeah, it's probably my biggest failure as a founder was reasonably early on in the company, making a key hire that was a wrong hire, and that happens. Like it's unavoidable. You'll do that probably multiple times in your career, and not having the skill set or the confidence to correct for that early.
Yeah.
And so we had someone there that we kind of had in a pretty key role for quite a while that was the wrong person for that role, but was trying to be kind and trying to be helpful and make it work. And ultimately, I think it was it's probably a pretty painful part of their career as well. And at the end, it was a pretty painful end to it, because it was like it was the wrong person in the wrong role, and I made it more painful for myself, for my co-founder, probably for the team, and definitely for this person as well. I'm sure it probably hit their confidence really hard. And ultimately, I was the one that decided to hire them. I was the one that decided not to correct course when it wasn't working, and either try and improve things or terminate it early. And I've really tried to not make that mistake again, of just saying that stuff sometimes doesn't work out, and that's fine, but you just got to talk about it and you got to correct for early.
Yeah.
And, it goes back to the people thing. Like at the end of the day, you are just a bunch of people.
I would challenge any founder or co-founder to not have a similar experience to that. I think it's kind of, it's inevitable as you evolve as a kind of business and a group, actually. Because to your point, initially it's a group, 2-3 people.
Yeah. You
evolve as a group, and then you start to think about bringing others into that group and what they could potentially kind of contribute, how that might help you scale and grow, or kind of you're introducing them because they have a particular skill set that you need for that next execution of growth. And I would, same, right? I would reflect back on that time, or have personally reflected back on that time and thought there were key moments where I probably didn't ask the questions I would typically ask. So as a recruiter as well, I mean, it's almost like a double failure, right? You're kind of almost like, I recruit for other businesses really successfully, and yet I've not recruited well for my own business. So people are like, oh my God. And it's interesting that there were certain questions that I typically would ask and or explore in more depth that I didn't. And that led to, I think, ultimately a hire that was maybe more aligned on what I needed and what I felt they could achieve, as opposed to perhaps their kind of capability level. And that's kind of, looking into sort of leadership training and kind of the psychology of leadership, that is both one of my strengths and weaknesses. One of my strengths is seeing the potential in somebody. The flip side and the weakness of that is I project my ambitions for them onto them. Yeah. And then if they don't meet that expectation, it's a mutual disappointment, right?
Yeah.
So thinking about that particular hire, was it similar? Did you hire for need? Were there certain things that you reflect on now that you kind of think, actually, had I asked this question, or actually, had I had this knowledge, I would have slightly approached this differently?
I think a huge part of it is learning to interview better, which comes from also having a much clearer idea of what you need for a role and then how you're going to test for it.
Yeah.
And we're much more deliberate in how we seek that out now. Whereas before it was like very much, and I still worry a lot of probably quite large companies hire this way as well. It's like, oh, great. That's some big, sexy company names on the CV.
Yep.
Like, great. And then you get on with the person. You're like, they come from a great set of companies. They can't be wrong. And also, by the way, they may have thrived in those companies as well.
Yep.
Just because someone's used to running a 50-person team doesn't mean they'll succeed in running a 5-person team, so that can also be true, or in a big company where you have all these support functions. And I think a lot of founders, particularly once you get to kind of like a dozen or so people, you'll think like, okay, I've got a bit of money, I've got a bit of budget, I can make a really key hire. You go for the biggest, best person you can. And then it's like, just because they've run a 100-person team at Salesforce doesn't mean they can run a 5-person sales team in a startup. Even though Salesforce might be like the granddaddy of these ones. And I'm making this up here, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think, and equally as well, I think there's some value in those experiences happening earlier and when you're a kind of smaller startup. Because I think they're more pronounced, so you do feel the pain of it. You do, for sure. But at the same token, the learning from it, I think, is greater and actually informs, to your point, how you interview going forward, what you look for going forward, the questions you ask going forward. So you're almost, whilst it's painful at the time, had that hire been made if you were 50 or 60 or 100 people, perhaps those certain, kind of performance issues, if it will, or lack of kind of match, wouldn't have been as highlighted, and that person might have stayed in the business longer and actually had, kind of more of a negative impact. Certainly if they're in a leadership role, they might have had more of a negative impact on where you want it to be. So I think, and equally as well, you kind of pay for that learning, right? You have to think of it in terms of, okay, the payment of time and probably, kind of investment of cost, but it is a learning. If you can flip to that mindset, and to your point, and, knowing it as I do, you would have approached it with a lot of empathy, a lot of kind of thoughtfulness, a lot of kindness. And to your point, that's probably why it maybe went on longer than it should have, because you were just like, look, I just really want this person. I feel like they can achieve this, but there's a certain point where you realize that perhaps that's not going to happen.
Exactly.
And then at the end of that process, the one thing that I would say to everybody is you kind of got to forgive yourself for that decision. You can't let it hang over you like, oh my God, am I going to make that mistake again? You're like, okay, I've taken the learnings from it. I forgive myself for that particular process. I'm happy that I handled it with, kindness and empathy, and now I can move on. And it's a big lesson. And I see, to your point, sometimes I see, kind of founders, co-founders want to run and move very quickly on from that situation because it's uncomfortable. It's not, and to your point, it's like, oh, I'm a founder, co-founder. Surely I should make better decisions. Actually, if you can't acknowledge those and share them, and kind of, share that knowledge, what kind of leader are you going to become? One that basically makes, wrong decisions and then runs very quickly from them into the next wrong decision.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's a lot of value in those learnings for sure. You touched upon culture, which I know is a massive thing for you, and certainly in terms of NearSt. How do you describe the culture of NearSt? What's its foundation?
One, very much built on these kind of 3 points of people, product, profit. So if you try and build an environment where people are valued and trusted, with the idea that people are here to do great work, and then you try and build an environment where they can do that, where you set high standards and expectations, but it's also, you put a lot of trust in people, and then you just listen a lot to like, okay, what do people need to get that done? And how do we, there's some bits where I'll have a strong opinion on things, but most of the time it's like, okay, here's what I think we should do. What do we think as a team? And then trust people to get on with it. Because ultimately, no one wants to go to work and do a bad job. No one wants to go to work and spend however many, hours of their week doing something they're not motivated by, don't enjoy, in a crappy environment. So it's like, how do you set up something where people can enjoy it and do really great work and do really focused work? And that's kind of at the heart of it. And so when we don't actually have a written set of values or behaviors, we've done it. We've done some sessions as a company on it, and we probably will at some scale need to actually write them down.
Yeah.
But most of all, it's just like, how do you just live it through behaviors and just reinforce it through things that we do and that we talk about and that we kind of give positive feedback for between ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think that it's quite a playful, energetic, trusting environment where people feel like, we're there genuinely to help them do good work and to enjoy themselves doing it.
100%. And I think I always maintain that culture is an organic thing, right? It's not something you can kind of write down and people adhere to. You can set the foundations with some values, but people interpret those values and align to certain values more than others. So it's really about, to your point, intentionally thinking about bringing together a group of people that first and foremost have kind of respect as a kind of baseline, kind of human trait. They actively listen and are prepared to listen to others' ideas and kind of contribute and empower others to contribute to the conversation. And then I think it's really around what those individuals bring to that kind of organic culture melt, as it were. And then you as a kind of co-founder and leader, your role is to just kind of guide, support and be there to support the growth of that culture. You can't sort of mandate, right, we need to stop doing this and we need to start doing this. I remember I can't remember the name of the company, but it was a couple of years back where it was a US company, and the founder or co-founder stopped all of the staff talking about politics at work.
It was Basecamp.
Yeah. And you could tell I understood the intention behind it, because he wanted to reduce kind of conflict. He wanted to, kind of reduce that polarization that politics brings into any conversation. But equally, then you're kind of restricting people's freedom of speech. And I know there were, it blew up as a story, right? Massively so. And I don't really recall what kind of happened after that. It was just like almost like whether it was retained as a kind of policy or not. But I think in that it was an illustration of how they tried to shape the culture. They really intentionally tried to shape with all the best will in the world, but hadn't really thought about the implications of it. And I think for me, it always resonates as an example of how probably not to approach your role as a leader. You know what I mean?
There's a really interesting podcast with the founder talking about that.
Okay,
that is worth digging into, and his reflections on how it went and what they would have done differently next time.
Yeah.
More than we can talk about today, but it's a really interesting look behind the scenes on what went on.
Overall, did you get the impression that he felt it was the right decision, or did you get the impression that he felt, in hindsight, I might not have shaped it or approached it in that particular way?
Right decision, wrong execution.
Yeah.
They feel the company is stronger now for it. And they had quite a lot of people leave, but they think actually the decision to do it was right. And actually some of that filtering in the culture was actually positive filtering, but the way of just doing it as a black and white announcement that was just plonked on the company without really a discussion, just no more politics was the wrong way to go about it. And they would have definitely done it differently.
Definitely.
The way they went about it was I'm summing up an hour's conversation there, but I agree. That was it.
Man. I mean, it's like, I understand, trying to reduce that kind of conflict between individuals, because politics is polarizing.
Well, and in the US.
And definitely. Yeah. And during the period of time that I think it happened, it was definitely polarizing. But at the same token, it's kind of perhaps facilitating a way for those conversations to happen, but, really getting people to bake in the respect and the active listening would have possibly been the kind of better approach. And I mean, I know we're way, way, way past kind of COVID now, but so obviously 100% remote during the kind of lockdown, you and the team, you operate a kind of hybrid model. Have you seen any other changes or trends in terms of the way people within the team want to work? And has that kind of influenced the way that you've approached your kind of leadership, or approached leadership at all? Or has it been a kind of a similar kind of pathway? Everybody's kind of come back to a hybrid model and you're pretty comfortable leading in that way. Nobody's gone, okay, cool. All these companies are work from anywhere policy, Nick, I'd love to work from, kind of Portugal for the next 3 months. So, and you've had to kind of think about what that might mean for the business. Like, say, for instance, the sales team. Yeah, I appreciate being in the UK is super important for sales, but I want to be in Portugal for the next 3 months so I can do everything remotely.
I think it comes from like the foundation of the culture. So the foundation of the culture is like, put a lot of trust in people and we listen, but we'll also have a view on things. So the way that Max and I have talked a lot about this is we're going to take a view on it, we'll explain it, but then we'll delegate the actual execution of that decision to the different team leads. And so the way we have it right now is we've got a very clear view on the office, and that it is an important place for people to meet and for us to kind of build the culture of the company, and where a lot of different things are just easier to get done, but that every team is different. And so each team is going to set their own kind of schedule. So for example, engineering, I think they will come into the office about once every 2 weeks. Customer success are in about 2 days a week. Sales, 4 days a week. And it's each team, sets it for what they need as a team. Now, people can come in more often if they want, and some people come in every day just because they prefer it. But it's more, what does the team need? 2 of our engineering team actually live in different cities in the UK. And as an engineering team, they're just like, actually, this is fine for us. And it works. Yeah. That wouldn't work for our sales team because of the way that we function, but it's just kind of delegating that decision making to the team, but within the framework of like, this is how we think about it. You guys figure out how to do your best work within that kind of general approach.
Yeah. I think that's, like I say, it's super important to have that kind of time together in person.
Yeah.
If nothing else, during lockdown, everybody missed it, right? I mean, it was kind of like, I remember when we all came out of lockdown, I was like, kind of getting to meet people in person again, for a kind of coffee and stuff like that. It was just great. And it was great to be in an environment with other people. Your office is a big tick in the box as well, because you got an awesome DJ in there. You know what I mean? So it is an immediate win there. You'd be like, I want to be in the office an extra couple of days a week, because some of the playlists are awesome.
Getting also delegated out to the team though.
Exactly.
Just there's a phone in the office with a free reign on Spotify. So whoever gets in.
Yeah, they get to be the DJ for the day.
Yeah.
It's wicked, man. Very wicked. And in terms of, kind of, I guess, some closing questions. What do you think are the 3 most important things you do which give you the space needed to thrive personally? And I know you're massive. So when we talked about the Boris bike bit, and I listened to that on the YouTube, I was like, Nick would have loved that. I know he would have absolutely loved that.
It was good fun.
But yeah, those sort of 3 things to give you the space to thrive kind of personally.
So the first one is being very deliberate with time. So by that, I mean, I think in startups, you hear so much of like the 100-hour week, which I think is a load of rubbish. I think more that's people that are not managing their time and feel like they're always working. So I very much think just be deliberate with your time. So when you're working and you're working like a dog, and you're being focused and getting as much out of yourself. And then when you stop, you stop.
Yeah.
And so what I won't be doing is like, I get to the end of the day, I finish, and then I'm constantly checking my email all evening. Like, it doesn't add any value. It just drains a lot of energy though.
Yeah.
Like, there's very rarely something that's going to come in between like 8:30 and 10:30 p.m. where it's come in as an email, but is critically urgent.
Yeah. 100%.
If it's critically urgent, someone will call me or WhatsApp me.
Yeah.
But so it's how do you be very deliberate when you're off, be fully off. When you're on, be fully on and focused. Don't kind of do this half.
Yeah.
And kind of tied to that is just really prioritizing and making deliberate space for like health and fitness. And it's super cliche, but within that, it's really defending that time, because at the end of the day, it isn't much time. So triathlon's a really big thing for me.
Yeah.
And even while running a startup, I completed my first Ironman last year. I've been doing triathlon for 7 or 8, maybe more, 10 years now.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of time to commit to, but actually it's fine. It's like an hour a day before work. Some days it's 2 things, an hour in the morning, hour in the evening, and then some hours on the weekend. It's not actually that much time in terms of the whole time in the week, but it gives you so much energy. And it's always the weeks where I compromise on that I feel lowest energy. And so I think that's part of just making space for that. And the third thing is then just this thing that I keep coming back to, which is this life motto of mine of just backing yourself. Just if you want to do something, whether it's work or personal, just back yourself to do it. Like there's no reason you can't. Just back yourself. And it seems so easy to say it, like, don't have self-doubt. And I have it as well, but just always coming back to that. I was like, no, there's no reason I can't do this.
Yeah. It's that kind of mindset, right? I think you find as a kind of leader, Well, the one thing that was kind of said to me that really resonates now more than ever is, as a leader, you need to be consistent. And I think sometimes emotionally consistent as well.
Yeah.
I think to that point around, that perhaps the perception of a founder, co-founder, they're kind of like, they should be full of brilliant ideas and they should be continually trying to change the world and evolving, the kind of business and the culture, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's really, for me, the most successful leaders are consistent, emotionally consistent in terms of the goals that they want to achieve, the journey that they want to take the kind of team and group on, consistent in the way that they support and kind of lead and manage the group and the team, you know what I mean? As opposed to kind of almost being, I use a kind of analogy of a firework, right? They're super, super sparkly and really great. And then and that can be the same as a leader. If you're that kind of firework, it's not consistent for the team. They need that consistency, that consistency of support. They don't want that firework that makes them feel really great for like a moment or a period or a time, and then it's gone.
Yeah.
And then they're craving the next time it happens. Whereas actually that consistency is super important, and that emotional consistency as well. Because ultimately, as a founder, co-founder, leader, you are going to encounter disappointment. You are going to encounter things that you don't want to happen. You're going to encounter things and situations that are challenging, and where you will be out of your comfort zone and still have to find answers, solutions, and continue to move forward. And that emotional consistency, I think, supports your ability to be able to do that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that's the one thing I always think of. Now, actually, the other closing question I was going to ask you, you've kind of answered in terms of how you've outlined NearSt's culture, but I do think it's still important just to kind of touch upon in so much as creating, and I think I put it down as, what are the three most important things that organizations should be doing to create environments where people can thrive? And I think you've touched upon a couple of those pieces, but if you could pull out one thing that in 2023, you as a leader thinking about NearSt, the one thing that you are going to do, either you will continue to do because you know it works, or another thing that you feel will work to really support everybody to make, to help them thrive and the organization therein to thrive as well.
So the core part of my job, and this is, if I know other founders that are starting out on their journey, it's how do you just give your team real clarity with the direction that we're going in as a company and their part to play in it, and then just try and remove as many barriers as you possibly can to them doing a good job. And most people are gonna do a good job.
Yeah.
Like, they might be at different stages of their career. They might not have the skills for it yet. They might need to learn, but probably you've hired smart people who are motivated by what you're doing. So if you can just be very clear, and this is really on you as a founder, like, how do you be super clear with where you're going and their role to play in it, and then figure out what they need to actually succeed and thrive in that, and just, either give them the tools or remove the barriers, then they're probably going to do a pretty good job. And they'll mess up a bunch, but generally, again, that's part of your job of creating that environment where they can mess up and it's okay. But if that's where we're going, what do you need? How do I get stuff out of your way so you can do it? They're going to probably be okay.
That's great.
And that's it.
I think it's a great way to close out the first podcast of season 2. Nick Brackenbury, it's been a pleasure chatting to you. Where can folks connect with you best if they want to follow up and learn a bit more about NearSt and your journey as a founder?
LinkedIn or Twitter is probably best. So just search for me on LinkedIn, Nick Brackenbury, or I'm sort of occasionally active on Twitter, trying to be more active than I am. And I'm just Nick Bracco on Twitter.
Awesome. Again, Nick, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure, man.
Thank you so much for having me.